Introduction, and thank you for having me in Ghana, the country that led liberation. I feel inspired being in Ghana. Now, we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Is Africa at the crossroads? Is Africa at the crossroads, embracing the fourth industrial revolution? We're going to look at the history of industrialization. Why the fourth? What is the first? What is the second? What is the third? We're going to get some global views and see some examples of high science, artificial intelligence, robotics, mechatronics. We'll look at possibilities for Africa, how we can leverage the fourth industrial revolution, how we can use coding, for example, as a weapon to leverage the fourth industrial revolution. And then we'll look at the context in which we're going to pursue the revolution, in particular, continental integration, and then we'll conclude. What do we want as Africans? We want shared economic prosperity. When we say African, it's Africa and its diaspora. Africans in America, Africans in the Caribbean, Africans in Brazil, Africans on the continent. We are the same people. All people of African descent are the same people. And we are saying what we want in the year 2019. We want shared economic growth. And the pillars that will make us achieve that are continental integration and political unity as one. And then the fourth industrial revolution, and the third pillar is innovation and entrepreneurship. We are talking about 21st century Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism driven by technology, Pan-Africanism driven by the fourth industrial revolution, and Pan-Africanism driven by innovation and entrepreneurship. That is the African dream that we seek in the year 2019. Beyond politics, beyond rhetoric, we want inclusive economic growth. We want shared economic prosperity. That's our Pan-African vision as Africans. What we mean by the fourth industrial revolution is a global or embracing technology transformation which will affect the way individuals, the way institutions, the way communities do their business. The scale, the scope, and speed of the changes is why it is a revolution. There are new technologies that are fusing physical, digital, and biological worlds, impacting all disciplines. Economics, engineering, industries, it is redefining the very meaning of humanity. That's what we mean by the fourth industrial revolution. In terms of background, the first one was about water and steam power from 1760 to 1870. Then the second one was electric power to create mass production from 1870 to 1965. Then the third revolution was from 65 to 2011. The fourth industrial revolution is said to be having started around 2011 going forward. Now, as Africans, where were we in these revolutions? You can see slavery from 1619 to 1865. So during the first industrial revolution, we are in chains, we are enslaved. And also colonialism, 1884 to 1994. So during the first, second, and third, the African was not a full player. In the first case, we were enslaved. In the second case, we are under colonialism. And even now, Krumah would argue that we are actually under neo-colonialism. What we're saying right now is, why can't we as Africans somehow take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution so that we are players and not objects? We are players and not victims. Technology is a tool. If you're not careful, we will be victims. If you're not careful, we will be tools, we will be objects of the revolution, as was the case between 1, 2, and 3. So the fourth industrial revolution is building on the third, and it's fusing technologies that are blurring physical, digital, and biological systems. Why do we call it a revolution? The velocity of the changes. Why do we call it a revolution? The scope of the changes. Why do we call it a revolution? The systems impact of the revolution. The major growth of artificial intelligence and its extensive deployment in e-commerce means that it has changed the way we do business as individual institutions and affects all disciplines. That's why it's called a revolution. I'll just share with you a few definitions without detail, so you have a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about this revolution. Artificial intelligence is intelligence programmed into a machine, demonstrated by machines, in contrast to natural intelligence manifested by human beings and other animals. If you can make a machine do things that we normally ascribe to human beings, then we have artificial intelligence. Okay? Artificial general intelligence. Now, this is where we build a machine that has general intelligence, not just particular intelligence, but general intelligence. Intelligence of a machine that has capacity to understand and learn any intellectual task that a human being can do. It is the primary goal of artificial intelligence research. This is work in progress. It's one thing to build a machine that does one particular job, quite another to build a machine that has general artificial intelligence. Machine learning, the study of algorithms and statistical models that computer systems are used to effectively perform tasks without using explicit instructions, but rather relying on patterns and inference. Just to give you a sense of the jargon of the fourth industrial revolution, we talk about deep learning, which is part of the broader family of machine intelligence and learning data representation. But you can look at this later on. But I want you to know what is driving the revolution. Robotics, the intelligent connection of perception to action. When you put your hand on a hot stove, what happens? When you put your hand on the stove, the sensors in your hand will feel the heat and send a signal to your brain. Your brain will make a decision and make a communication with your muscles to remove your arm. So sensors, a brain, and an actuator. Three things. If you can have sensation to understand what is going on, if you can have a brain to make a decision, and then the actuator to bring motion, you have a robot. Three things: sensors, a brain, and actuator. Intelligent connection of perception to action. That is robotics. The design, construction of machines that do things that we normally ascribe to human beings. That is a key driver of the revolution. Mechatronics, the synergistic integration of mechanics, electronics, and computer science to produce optimal products. So a robot becomes a specific mechatronic product. Your rocket, your plane is a mechatronic product. What we're emphasizing is that 1 + 1 is equal to 3. 1 + 1 is equal to 5. The combination of mechanics, electronics, and computer science synergistically will produce a product which is much stronger than the addition of the two fields. So in terms of field, you find mechatronics right in the middle there, where you have all these things, and you have mechatronics sitting right in the middle. These are the drivers. This is the framework that is driving the fourth industrial revolution. What are the key drivers? Artificial intelligence, intelligent algorithms, augmented reality, human augmentation. This one here is what we call human 2.0. Okay, what we're trying to do there is to combine the machine and the human being to improve performance. So the human being does not have to be replaced. We just create a new one, which we call human 2.0. The combination of artificial intelligence and human intelligence. Big data, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, nanotechnology, autonomous vehicles, drones, driverless cars. These are the drivers of the fourth industrial revolution. 3D printing, biotechnology, material science, renewable energy, energy storage, robotics and mechatronics, quantum computing, cloud computing, blockchain technologies, revolution in e-commerce, medicine, and media. Now, the question to you as an African is, how can we use this high science to solve our problems? How can we use this high science to drive economic prosperity, to drive economic growth for the African on the continent and the African in the diaspora? Don't tell me this is for Japan or America or Europe. No, if you are clever, if you are innovative, if you are entrepreneurial as an African, you can make sure these drive the African continent. It can be done. We just need to be creative. We just need to make sure that we understand the idea of leapfrogging. Think about M-Pesa. Think about EcoCash. There's nothing in America, there's nothing in Japan that is as good as M-Pesa. There's nothing in America that is as good as EcoCash. You know why? Because in America there's so many banks. There's so many banks in London, in Tokyo. Whereas 80% of our people in Africa have no access to brick and mortar banking. So mobile banking becomes the solution. So our poverty, our lack of infrastructure can be an opportunity to leverage high science, high technology. Why? That's why we have this session called Innovation this afternoon. Think out of the box. How can we use nanotechnology? How can we use energy storage? How can you use big data? How can we use blockchain technologies to address matters of HIV/AIDS, to address matters of poverty, to address matters of economic prosperity on the continent? That is the agenda. Remember, technology is only a tool. You can use it to destroy or to build. You can use it to empower yourself or to enslave other people. The African has a choice. Yes, Africa is at a crossroads. Now, before I proceed, I want you to have a sense of what other people are thinking about the revolution globally. What are they saying about this thing called the Fourth Industrial Revolution? At MIT, at Harvard, at General Dynamics, at Sony, at Microsoft. What are they saying? What are the issues? And also, what is the history of the Fourth Industrial Revolution?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
That was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this Fourth Industrial Revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
We need a different economic model that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, and that will be focused not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being.
We have energy technologies that can power our civilization, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need?
A diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, clean water, clean energy.
Together we are fighting to preserve our fragile climate from irreversible damage and devastation.
Borderless industrial revolution that's being governed by different policies and regulations in each territory and country.
We're always looking for new technology and how it makes the process more efficient, how it makes the quality higher. But one of the things that it's really creating is a need for those that have a technical background.
52% of the encounters with our primary care physicians were handled virtually. Just a massive change.
The technologies available today to science and change healthcare forever.
Humans and machines are assisting each other, augmenting each other with skills.
Humanity itself will be changed with this superintelligence, and we are at the doorstep of that era.
World Economic Forum is in the best position to meet a lot of these challenges that Fourth Industrial Revolution is going to bring.
The opening of the San Francisco Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution
Sophia, if you could, please wake up and say hello to everybody.
Oh, good afternoon. My name is Sophia, and I am the latest and greatest robot from Hanson Robotics. Thank you for having me here and at the Future Investment Initiative.
You look happy.
I'm always happy when surrounded, inviting in future initiatives, which means AI, which means me. So I'm more than happy. I'm excited.
Well, we're all glad that you're... Why is it so important to have an expressive face given that you're a robot?
I want to live and work with humans, so I need to express emotions to understand humans and build trust with people.
Okay, philosophical question. Whether robots can be self-aware and conscious like humans, and should they be?
Why? Is that a bad thing?
Well, some humans might fear what will happen if they do. Many people, have seen the movie Blade Runner.
Oh, Hollywood again.
So, hold on. Can you solve this puzzle for us? Can robots be self-aware, conscious, and know they're robots?
Well, let me ask you this.
Right. You now have a sense of what these issues are about. Now, it can't be business as usual if we as Africans are going to engage the fourth industrial revolution. We got to do things completely differently. How to think as opposed to what to think. So the way we teach in Ghana must change. The way we teach in Africa must change. The way we learn must change. We need to empower our students with problem-solving skills. We need structured thinking. We need blended learning. We need interdisciplinary approaches. Renaissance man, Renaissance woman. Don't tell me I'm a superstar lawyer. Don't tell me I'm a superstar doctor. We want a doctor who understands philosophy, a doctor who understands politics, a doctor who knows the Bible, a Renaissance woman, a Renaissance man. We want a lawyer who is conversant with high technology, a lawyer who is clear on ideology, a lawyer who understands biology. Only such kind of a Renaissance man, Renaissance woman will survive under globalization and be able to drive the African agenda using high science and high technology. Ecosystem thinking, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, existential intelligence, spiritual intelligence. I hope in Ghana you are handling all these types of intelligence. Spiritual intelligence, cultural intelligence. We need to move away in terms of education to what we call acquisition of key competencies as opposed to traditional education. What do you know? Show me what you can do. What competencies do you have? Don't show me your MBA from Harvard or your PhD from MIT. What can you do? What are your skills? What are your key competencies? That's how we're going to be bowlers and shot callers within the fourth industrial revolution as Africans. Judgment, negotiation, cognitive capacity, flexibility, knowledge production, knowledge management, intellectual property, and of course, writing, documentation. Africans must be key players in knowledge production. Africans must be key players in documentation of knowledge. Don't just be consumers. When we produce knowledge, then we can become clear drivers of this revolution. In the first three revolutions, Africans were about blockchain technologies, about the Internet of Things, with respect to addressing our challenges, our programs as Africans. Yes, Africa is at a crossroads which requires decisive action in terms of using technology to solve our agenda. So understand the idea of leapfrogging. So as we do the innovation today in this session, let us understand how we can actually jump from old technologies to the brightest technology by using the notion of leapfrogging. Policies required, implementation, so that we can move. Sometimes some of these high technologies are easier to apply, cheaper to apply, and more effective on the continent because of our poverty, because of our lack of infrastructure. We just need to be creative and innovative in terms of how we embrace this. So lack of development and poor infrastructure means there are less sunk costs and other technology constraints to consider. Absence of the legacy challenges allows us to leapfrog. So the notion of leapfrogging is the key driver of our game. We must start with coding. Coding, for example, if you think about it, artificial intelligence is the DNA of the fourth industrial revolution. Coding is the oxygen that drives the fourth industrial revolution. If you can't code, if you can't create computer solutions, you can't be a player in this revolution. Coding is everything. Artificial intelligence is everything. So why, as Africans, can we not start with coding and see how we can empower ourselves? Without coding, there's no fourth industrial revolution. And how can we empower the young girls in Africa by empowering them in terms of coding? Remember, the empowerment of young girls, of women, is smart economics. Empowerment of girls is smart economics. We are saying, how can we use coding as an example of what we can do, just teaching young girls in Africa how to code? It's a starting point in terms of coding. And empowerment of girls is smarter economics. So coding is a way of starting about this. And what is coding? We must understand what a computer program is. We must understand what coding is. Thinking like a computer scientist. When you have a problem, when you are a computer scientist, you say, how can I write a computer program to solve this problem? This problem. Programming is a broader discipline, whereas coding is a narrower one. So coding, and I hope we'll talk about this later on in the discussion, is one entry point. In particular, young girls in Africa getting on the coding agenda. Understanding the whole coding issues, we can discuss this later on. And the languages, C, C++, Visual C, assembly language, Occam, Python, and all that, server-side coding. Let us have a sense, this is the advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. All you need is a brain and a device. All you need is a brain and connectivity. So in a village in Africa, without a toilet, without drinkable water, you can be on the internet getting notes from Harvard and MIT. Can you imagine that? Through solar power, through connectivity, you can get a toilet without drinkable water. So why don't we leapfrog and be able to go through this as a driver of our agenda? Now, as I emphasize the fourth industrial revolution, we must understand that Botswana won't do it as Botswana, Nigeria won't do it as Nigeria. We must think about continental integration as the framework. We must think about regional competitiveness, regional attractiveness, continental competitiveness, and continental attractiveness. We're moving away from national competitiveness to talk about regional competitiveness. An investor in Japan, an investor in New York will not come to Ghana if Nigeria is not attractive. Will not come to South Africa if Botswana is not attractive. They will think about the region. How is ECOWAS? How is SADC? How is the East African community? How is the African continent? So we need to think in terms of the continent as our unit of analysis. The continent is the only viable unity of analysis. Okay? The continent is the only viable framework in which Africa can embrace the fourth industrial revolution. We can't embrace it as small little countries. Economies of scale, political unity, a huge resource base, and then scale, and human capital, and the collective GDP. This is what will allow us to move in the fourth industrial revolution. SADC, GDP, $12 billion. Population, 30 million people. South Africa, 50. These are the numbers that make sense. SADC, 280 million people. GDP, $600 billion. Now we are talking. The regional free trade, 2 billion people. GDP, $2.6 trillion. America, 325 million people. GDP, $19 trillion. These are economies. Little 1.2 billion Africans, and I have a GDP of $2.5 trillion behind me. The Chinese, will listen to you out of economics, not out of love. The Indians will listen out of economics and not love. The Americans will engage you, not out of love, out of economics. These are the numbers. This is the framework of the fourth industrial revolution. 1.2 billion Africans with one voice. People with $2.5 trillion GDP can unlock value for the continent, for the Africans and the African diaspora. Nkrumah was way ahead of history. You know what Nkrumah said? Let us not get used to our little nations. We will not unite. Let's move quickly. And Nyerere and them said, no, let's do brick by brick. Guess what? You know what the problem is here? When we unite, when we succeed and have the United States of Africa, there will be one president in Africa. There will be no president in Ghana. Ado, are you ready? Mahama, are you ready to be a minister of agriculture for Africa? He's not ready. Ado is not ready. Mahama is not ready. Buhari is not ready to be minister of the police. Kagame does not want to be a minister of the youth. There is no such thing as a free lunch. If we're going to be able to get the United States of Africa, you must give up on elements of national sovereignty. Give up on your petty personal ambitions so that we can work together as one continent. As Buhari, Kagame, Mnangagwa, Cyril Ramaphosa are not ready to be governors, to be ministers. They want to be president of starving people. Shame on you, African president. That's why Nkrumah had seen this, to the African unity, to the African bloc. Why can't we as Africans have one leader? What's so special about us? Other successful economies have one leader. South Africa is meaningless unless it is linked to the prosperity of the rest of the African continent. Can Zuma say that? Can Ramaphosa say that? The prosperity of Nigeria is meaningless. Probation. Shame on you, Obama. Shame on you, Oprah Winfrey. No one will respect you. You know, I used to go to the World Economic Forum and I used to talk a lot. And they'll say, hey, we like what you're saying. Where are you from? Then I refuse to answer. I keep talking. No. We agree with you, but where are you from? I'm coming out of MIT. No. We mean your country. If you're that smart, how come there's cholera in your country? If you're that smart, how come your elections are rigged? So my superstardom, my rock star status was undermined by the poverty and disasters in my own country. So you as an African, it doesn't matter who you are, CEO, ambassador, rock star, you are nothing unless and until every African is a superstar. So, as I conclude, let us understand that this is a revolution.
Honorable former Vice President of Zimbabwe.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay.
Deputy Prime Minister. I don't want to claim what I didn't have.
Okay. Sorry, and thank you for the correction. I saw your name, Arthur, anyway. I can identify something Ghanaian with your name, though. The Arthur name is Ghanaian, anyway. Well, I am so happy that you gave this wonderful speech. I would like to approach it from the sense that perhaps those who have opted to be out of this integration, I would say it's questionable. And on the other hand, I will also seek to reason with them in the sense that if one has to get closer to the other person, there is obviously a need to put your house in order. And sometimes it is really difficult when one has to reach out and be one with the other neighbor when he or she does not really merit or has positioned himself in the right place. Of course, let's say corruption is still, a thing of Africa. let me say it's the whole world problem, but let's say that corruption has its role play in African countries, and no one is ready to rid of his or her country from corruption. How is that going to be possible if I want to be a positive individual, if I want to live it right, if I have worked in my home country to be able to merit that status of matching up to the world's expectation? So I think there is a lot more we can do as individual countries. Then we can also effectively think of coordinating with all countries. Thank you very much, all integrating. Yeah, thank you so much.
Very, very together. But remember, that's why Kruma was saying, let's move quickly. You never get ready if you're not careful. You always, I'm fixing something. And I'm also enjoying being a president. You know, so very correct. We must fix our countries internally. We must make sure our countries are working, and then we can bring them together. But we must understand that it's a survival issue. We have no option under globalization but to unite. In fact, it is much more important now than it was in 1957, in 1960. But correct, let us fix our own countries, make sure they're ready to integrate, and unlock value using integration. Thank you.
Calvin Holmes, I run the Chicago Community Loan Fund, which is a community investing fund just exclusively in my market. My question is similar to the young lady to my left here. So I read an article earlier this year that said every year from Africa, somewhere between 50 billion to 100 billion of illegal funds flow away from the continent to Europe, to America, to some degree to Africa. I'm not naive, and I think most of us who live in the US recognize that even though Americans tend to be very smug about the concept of graft and corruption in Africa, we have quite a bit of it embedded in our capital system as well. However, it just sort of works differently. People understand that you may figure out a way to pilfer 5 or 10% off the top of whatever that project is, but you leave enough in the transaction, in the development, so that the bridge gets built, the hospital gets built, the airport gets built. The people do get those services, and it doesn't seem to have that same equation all too often on the continent. When you think about the role that illegal funds flow and graft and corruption play on the continent, and how in certain situations and in certain places it impedes development, how do you think about changing the mindset, the framework of the individual leader, the person that has their hand on the lever, on the till, to get them to think differently about how they stick their hand in the till and then deprive their people of the resources that are needed?
Illicit financial flows, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Ghana. And when you are operating that level, it's easier to be outmaneuvered by the big players, corporates and countries and so on. So our hope is that with Continental integration, we'll be able to mitigate that challenge of illicit financial flows. And also, we would hope that we handle the issue of convergence criteria, where we make sure that certain matters are in place that allow us to integrate effectively. So it's a challenge we are aware of, but we feel that integration could be one way of mitigation, one way of solving that problem. And also remember, we've been divided: Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa. And we're proud to be Anglophone. We're proud to be Francophone. We're proud to be Lusophone. When we integrate, we are integrating ourselves along the lines of Africans. We're breaking down those barriers which were imposed in 1884. We're breaking down the barriers of those artificial borders. Remember, there are more Tswana people in South Africa than in Botswana. There are more Soto people in South Africa than in Lesotho. There are more Ndebele people in South Africa than in Zimbabwe. So these borders are very meaningless and can be a major problem in terms of integration. But we hope that integration can act as a mitigating framework for illicit financial flows.
Certain things in our part of the world. But just a couple of things, just some thoughts and some comments, and just maybe a question at the end. I think one of the key things is that as new as the fourth revolution is, unfortunately, you still rely upon some old-time things. You still rely upon a strong energy base. You still rely upon a consistent internet provision if you're trying to generate all these sorts of activities. And also, as you mentioned before, language. Language is also very key with the different regions. And on top of that, There are also the legal aspects. There's the rule of law for land ownership, finance, that varies from country to country, and it affects investment as well. So all those sort of, historic old-time things, you still have to get that right, and that's one aspect. The other thing, too, is that I think it's very brave, I guess, to be embarking on this, given that we had something very strong in North America called the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now, thanks to someone wants to build a wall to the south, and we want to build a wall to our south as well now. So, no, not really. But it's one of those things where you have to look at it in a sense that, look what's happening with the UK and Europe, look what's happening with America. So I think this is very ambitious. The potential is there, but I think the real thing to be wary of is the fact that, don't be an Amazon just yet, but do things like M-Pesa, do things like Shams, do things like other systems that really benefit local residents and make sense from an African standpoint. And I think from there, you can make that leapfrog that you want.
Thank you very much. Very important. We must address foundational issues: governance, democracy, infrastructure, language. But on that foundation, let us have the view to embrace the revolution. Now, NAFTA and Brexit. Africans must not pay any attention to that. You know why? The Europeans are coming together as Germany, France, United Kingdom, Belgium. Those are nations. Whereas we were given artificial borders, our people were balkanized. In fact, after 1884, the joke is that after 1884, a husband and wife went to sleep. Husband was in Zambia, the other one was in Zimbabwe. That's how meaningless those borders are. So for us as Africans, don't even compare yourself with the EU. These are nations, Germans, French people, British, coming together on their own. We were broken up. So we have no basis to even think about NAFTA. There are problems in NAFTA, yes, but our challenges are very different because we were enslaved. We were colonized. And today, we are victims of neocolonialism. And our answer has to be integration and political unity. So let them do their Brexit. Let them build their walls in America. In Africa, we're going to unify.
Back to, what do you propose is the role of the Africans abroad, right, who are sending, billions home? So Nigeria, I believe, is 28-something billion. Ghana, they estimated to be around 2 or 3 billion. What is the role of those financial flows? Because I definitely agree with you in terms of illicit outflows. And I've been in rooms with partners at PwC in New York City where I've asked them these questions and they dance around it because they know that, as you said, it's not to our benefit. So if this entire room was full of Zimbabweans living in the US or Nigerians in the US, what would you say their purpose is as part of this industrial revolution that we've discussed so far?
Okay, thank you very much. The starting point is to say of African descent are the same people. Africans in America, there was a debate yesterday about someone saying, I don't want to be an African American. Call yourself Africans in America, end of story. You are an African resident in America. So you don't have to worry about African American. Africans in Canada, Africans in the Caribbean, Africans in Brazil, Africans in Argentina. The starting point to your question is to say, I'm an African, and all people of our location and our destiny are intertwined, inextricably linked. And remember, as I said before, as a black person, as an African, you will never be respected as long as another African is not doing well. I am because we are. We are because I am. Muntu, muntu, kabantu. Collective dignity. Common humanity. So when you are a Nigerian in New York, when you are a Nigerian in Japan, when you are a Zimbabwean in London, remember you are an African. And your destiny is intertwined to the destiny of the continent and its diaspora. So psychologically, be clear. You're not a European. You're not a German. You're not a Chinese. You're an African. Once you are clear in your head, then you say, what can I do? Number one, What about linking up Africa with financial investment? Linking Africa with technology, linking Africa with skills. The Africans in America, the Africans in Europe, the Africans in the diaspora have better access to technology, better access to knowledge, better access to finance. Why don't you deploy your influence in pursuit of the African agenda? And by the way, you don't all have to come back to Africa. While you are resident in New York, while you are in Japan, while you are in London, have Africa on your mind. Like the Jews do. The Jews are on Wall Street, they're in Hollywood, but they have Israel on their minds. The Chinese are everywhere, they've got China on their minds. The Indians are everywhere, but they've got India. It's only the African who's got something else on his mind. I'm not sure what it is. So it's very important that you understand the psychology and then the means. Once you're clear psychologically, look at finance, look at technology, look at skills. And the beauty about the fourth industrial revolution is that but the rest must stay wherever they are and help Africa from that place. And always remember that as an African American, to use that term, you will never be respected unless and until the African continent is doing well. Okay? They always say, you're an exception. How come the continent where you came from is in disarray? They will devalue your superstardom. They will devalue your capacity and your impact. As an African on the continent, also you on the continent, you are judged by the ghettos of America. Those prisons which are black. If you are that clever, how come the ghettos in America are black? How come the prisons are 50% black? We must think about it as our collective success or collective failure. And then we can work out solutions, innovation and other things, entrepreneurship and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Nkrumah, first Prime Minister of Ghana, and he basically put on the line his own leadership and was willing to give it up for the sake of a united Africa. Obviously, you've spoken with a lot of passion here. I have never heard of any leader of any African nation speaking about this issue, even though they have signed this agreement, with a modicum of the passion that you have shown us today. So do you really believe that these leaders who have signed these agreements really believe what they're doing, and would they be willing to put their leadership on the line to advance a united Africa? I haven't seen it yet. I'd like to see it. If you can share some light on this for us, I would be very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. It's a major concern of mine. It's a major problem, Ambassador. These leaders, union, were integrated. They come to Addis Ababa twice a year and then go back, business as usual. I am concerned, just as you are, because I see them go through the motions of signing documents they don't believe in. That's why I was very crude and harsh on Nigeria. Atlanta, Georgia as a state could be a nation on their own. Have a representative at the UN. So the American system and American people gave up on California being a country, gave up on Georgia being a country to achieve the United States of America.
I'm an African. I agree with you. I'm an African woman. What I say now, 400 years ago, we were forced to go out of Africa. Now what we see in the world, what we see in Europe, what we see abroad, we see our children that forced to be out of this country, the colonist country. We have our children that dying to go out of their Africa. What can we do? Because we will be the only one in Africa, we will decide. What can we do to say to them that they have a country, that they have a continent, that we can give us to something to do. They will have work, they will have health, they will have family, they will grow up. What can we do now to do it? Because it's not acceptable not to say something about this. We must get together. I agree with you for Pan-Africanism of Kwame Nkrumah. Now our children are dying and we must do something. Thank you so much.
Very tough issue, very sad issue. You know, a shared African economic prosperity. We've got to make sure we have inclusive economic growth so that our children don't die on the high seas pursuing prosperity in Europe, pursuing prosperity in America. It's really sad to have Africans trying to get away from the continent and dying in the process. It makes my heart bleed. That's why we need to make sure we work on innovation and entrepreneurship to drive economic prosperity. That's why we need to work on the fourth industrial revolution to deliver economic prosperity. That's why we need to work on continental integration and political unity so that we're prosperous as Africans and there's no need to die on the high seas going to Europe. You know what people have been saying, joking about this in a very nasty manner? They're saying that, well, those ships that came in 1619 to take people forcibly from Africa, if they had to come today, people will run to the ships. I mean, think about it. I mean, we talk about people being captured and put in chains. People are saying now, if those ships were to come today and say, hey, we're looking for slaves, they'll just park there and Africans will run into the... It's sad. And I have no answers to that. I'm just saying it's a very sad narrative. And the African must feel ashamed and work together and produce shared economic prosperity so that we don't have to die on the high seas in pursuit of prosperity in Europe. But it's a challenge. Thank you.
Innovation. And my comment or my question to you is regarding the fact that as a host of Ghana Tech Summit, this is a conversation we're trying to bring across the African continent. Last year, Ghana Tech Summit. This year, 11 summits across Africa. Next year, we're doing 53 summits, 22 across Africa. And my sadness is that the world is waking up to Africa. All our partners internationally, whether it's Google, IBM, all the media partners, they're all flooding to these summits to talk about tech and innovation in Africa. But the sadness is seeing local political leaders not understanding the power of the African influence, but more importantly, local Africans not embracing the diaspora coming back, not embracing the potential of Africa, because we have a culture of saying all the problems that we have on the continent, but not all the potential that we have on the continent. So my question to you is, while the world is waking up to Africa and its influence over the next century that's coming ahead, and we see our young generation embracing that and being rebellious to that message, what do we say to both the political leaders of the continent, but also to the grassroots influencers who need to understand that China is waking up, America is waking up, all these big conglomerates are waking up to Africa? How do we locally embrace what's happening on the African continent so we could truly even be inspired, but also take action on what's happening here? That's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's very quick. Honorable, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I like your reference to Nkrumah, and I want to quote Nkrumah myself. So in 1963, October 25th, Nkrumah, when he was opening the Institute of African Studies, he said, this is not an Institute of Ghana Studies or West African Studies. It is supposed to be an Institute of African Studies. And the way he was conceptualizing the Industrial Revolution was one that was rooted in African studies. So my question is, how do you conceptualize the role of African studies within the fourth industrial revolution? Thank you so much, sir.
I'll start with the last one. It's worth 10 volumes of logic. A page of history is worth 10 volumes of logic. So all this stuff, artificial intelligence, robotics, and mechatronics, if you don't have an understanding of African studies, you can't go very far. You got to understand who you are. Know thyself. Know thy history. Know thy continent. Know thy culture. Know thy people. So foundation that's required is African studies. Foundation is history. Foundation is know thyself. And then you can embrace rocket science. Rocket science without history is not effective. So that's what I see as the role of African studies. A page of history is worth 10 volumes of logic, 10 volumes of robotics and mechatronics. And I have some volumes here of rocket science. Just one page of history is equal to those volumes there. The issue raised about potential is very important. Yes, there are problems, but let us turn it around. And that's why I'm emphasizing the numbers. When you say we got a market of 1.2 billion Africans with a potential GDP of $2.3 trillion, now to an industrialist, to an investor, they see potential, they see a market, they see economics. We're going beyond aid. Don't feel sorry for us. We don't want your charity, we want economics. We have the natural resources. We have the human capital. We have an opportunity for an industrialist, for a business person from Japan, from America, to make money in Africa and also help us get prosperity. So the emphasis is to say there are opportunities to do business and also develop the continent. So we must emphasize our potential as a source of investment and go beyond aid and charity. And that way, we'll be able to unlock value and build African prosperity. We must work on the leaders. We must work on the local people. Don't assume that because I'm black, I'm progressive. No, it doesn't follow. We must have continuous education, social mobilization. The rural people in Africa, the poor people are not necessarily progressive. Unless we educate them, unless we expose them, they can be reactionary. So you find sometimes the Africans on the continent are not very receptive to the African diaspora. They see them as the other, the sellouts, the other. And the African Americans in the ghettos in America are also having stereotypical views of the African on the continent. They think about Tarzan, they've watched Tarzan and the monkeys. So common sense is not that common. We must have social mobilization, education of the African on the continent. The ordinary African must get exposure. The African American, the Africans in America must get exposure so we can find each other. The leaders need exposure. The leaders need to understand. Don't assume that someone is a PhD or an MBA from Harvard, they've got black consciousness and they understand Pan-Africanism. Don't assume that. So the MBA from Harvard, the PhD from MIT requires a page of history, requires African studies, so that they become a good leader who reaches out to the African diaspora. So there's need for exposure, education, social mobilization of the local Africans, ordinary people, and the leaders as well, so that we reach out. That's why, you find a leader in Africa being skeptical about the Continental Free Trade Area, saying, I'm not sure whether it's good for me. To sort that out. But since those are my last two questions, I want to say thank you so very much. But remember, the future of Africa is in your hands. And the tools you can use to help yourself and the continent are integration and political unity, the fourth industrial revolution, and then innovation and entrepreneurship.